Tom Holland recently posted a set photo of himself in costume as Nathan Drake from the upcoming film adaptation of Uncharted, in which Holland plays the lead role. Fans have been skeptical ever since this casting was originally announced, and these new photos have only reinvigorated the controversy. While many respect and admire Holland for his recent star status thanks to having played a certain bug-themed MCU hero, a lot of fans have complained about his appearing too young for the role, and lacking the charisma he would need to adequately portray the character. The Uncharted film in its own right is divisive at best, since its initial announcement over a decade ago. Needless to say, the project has been in development hell for years already, and has been through a revolving door of producers and cast members until it finally began post-production as of earlier this year. Finally being set to release in July of 2021, only time will tell if this immensely long wait will be worth it, or if it will just be yet another forgettable, underwhelming Hollywood cash cow. The constant criticism of the film's casting choices and perceived lack of passion are understandable, given the overall reputation that film adaptations of video games have gained over the years. Most average gamers and moviegoers alike will tell you that there are very few, if any, worthwhile and genuinely good video game adaptations out there. Most of them range from mediocre, like Assassin's Creed and Tomb Raider, to downright terrible, like Street Fighter or, dare I mention it, Far Cry. It has become somewhat of a running gag year after year as the ever-popular gaming industry is met with seemingly constant announcements of film adaptations by gigantic studios, with A-list celebrities often at the forefront. It has gotten to the point nowadays where most people immediately discredit the quality of a film based on a video game series because of the almost guaranteed lack of quality and understanding by the studios of what makes video games so appealing. Uncharted is a hugely successful AAA franchise with millions of fans, and Nathan Drake himself has become something of an icon for both Sony and the developer Naughty Dog. The series is known and beloved for its quirky, quick-witted protagonist and the realistic, charming dialogue between its characters. The story is not particularly engaging by any means, since it mostly borrows tropes from popular adventure stories like Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider. However, the appeal comes from how the characters interact with each other in believable ways, paired with the simple but engaging gameplay loop of constant action and loud, over-the-top shootouts in exotic locations. Nathan Drake specifically is an extremely likable character, even if he isn't particularly compelling in terms of character growth. In general, it is easy to see why the franchise has gained so many fans with its diverse cast of personalities. The simple fact that Uncharted as a series exists as a video game franchise instead of a film series is what allows it to resonate with players on such a significant level. The plot is generally pretty simple and doesn't even change all that much throughout the series. It's usually just an ancient artifact or a location that Drake wants to find before another, less noble bad guy does. It's cut and dry stuff for any adventure story, and that alone would make it pretty forgettable if it had nothing else to offer. Most of the likability and chemistry between the main cast comes from the subtle interactions they have in between cutscenes and while exploring the world.
Hey, check it out. Marco!
Really?
Come on!
No.
Marco!
Hello.
Fish out of water!
You are so unprofessional.
This sense of camaraderie is what builds up the relationships between them and lets the story be the backdrop for their interpersonal struggles and adventures. This type of storytelling is something that can only really be achieved through an interactive medium like video games. In a game, the player isn't solely focused on the plot and what will happen next in the story. Their attention is divided between wanting to explore the world and get through the big action set pieces and puzzles, conserving their ammo, deciding whether to take the stealth approach or simply unload on enemies. It's all very interactive, and the player is rewarded with another cutscene at the end of a particularly challenging section of the game. Perhaps a boss fight is giving them trouble, and after hours of learning the patterns they finally win, and are rewarded with a scene that gives them the satisfaction of seeing their downfall play out as a direct result of their personal actions in the game. The reason the player cares about what happens to the bad guys is because they are the ones that make it happen. This gives the writers a lot more slack, since even the most generic villain can still be satisfying to defeat if the encounter with them is challenging and frustrating. It becomes a personal struggle for the player just as much as for the character they're controlling, and this is something that a film simply cannot replicate. The reason why so many film adaptations fail is for the simple fact that most video games have deceptively simple plots. Collect these mystical artifacts and save the universe. Travel across the world to stop an evil madman bent on destroying it. There really isn't much to these stories in terms of writing, but they still work exceptionally well because of the interactive nature of video games. Hunting down a bad guy because the game tells you to isn't particularly interesting, but unraveling clues and secrets about the world, exploring tombs and dungeons, and making the adventure be the main appeal creates a much bigger sense of scale than any medium can possibly emulate. Sure, The Lord of the Rings is a beloved film franchise that is set in a hugely expansive mythical world, but the main focus of the series is still on the story and the characters, and the nature of film means that the audience can only care about the things the filmmakers go out of their way to show them. It's not possible to slowly uncover the reasons why the ring is such an evil creation, or to start inferring on why the world is the way it is, since the film can only show you what is immediately apparent to the plot. There are no inconsequential side quests or deep, expansive character arcs that happen over the course of hours of screen time. The medium of film is inherently limiting since the audience is merely an observer of the world, instead of an active participant. The film Warcraft is an interesting case in the world of video game adaptations, since it isn't necessarily hated by everyone. Sure, it was a commercial failure, and most average audiences didn't quite get the hype, but any longtime fans of the series it is based on seemed to appreciate it. The film relied on years of established Warcraft lore to tell its story, and the simple fact is that there is just way too much of it to cram into a single 2-hour movie. This results in tons of references and characters that average audiences simply would not understand without having been immersed in the world through the games it is based on. The appeal of Warcraft was never in its plot, but rather in its presentation, strategic gameplay, and expansive universe and lore. The lifelong battle between orcs and humans is much more meaningful when the audience is directly involved in its outcome, and this is where the film simply fails to deliver. It's not enough to tell the audience that war is immoral and has gone on for centuries, and then expect them to feel emotional toward the characters that experience it. Warcraft failed because it sat on the foundation of previously established lore that went over the heads of anyone who hadn't played the games. This being the case, many filmmakers have taken a different route entirely when adapting a video game franchise by creating an entirely separate universe to set their film in. This sets it apart from the games and allows the studio and director to insert new ideas into an already beloved franchise, potentially opening it up to new fans. At least that's how it should play out on paper. Unfortunately, this has proven to be almost equally unsuccessful, as many adaptations in this form have been criticized just as much. Resident Evil, for instance, received an adaptation in the form of a series of films directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. While the series contains elements and characters from the games, it is very much its own entity, almost entirely abandoning the horror roots of the video games in favor of an over-the-top sci-fi action franchise. The Resident Evil film series certainly has its fans, but its existence as a whole presents a major issue with the concept of adaptations in general. Anyone who sees these films without an understanding of the series beforehand will have an extremely skewed idea of what the story is about and who the characters are. The Umbrella Corporation is no longer a shadowy, mysterious force of evil, but rather a multinational global conglomerate that literally controls the entire planet. The T-virus is no longer just a mutagenic lab creation that turns people into zombies, but rather a veritable super soldier serum that gives them inhuman psychic and physical abilities. The series overall is now a massive Matrix-style sci-fi action franchise rather than a survival horror series. The concept of adapting a video game into a film is inherently flawed since films simply cannot replicate the interactive nature of video games and the worlds in which they are set. It is impossible to create an ever-growing fantasy world that constantly evolves as the story continues when the writers are restricted to 2 hours for their runtime. This forces them to create simple, easy-to-understand plots that then become the main focus of the film. In a medium where the story is often secondary to the world in which it occurs, reversing this established formula is a recipe for critical disaster. However, in recent years, a new paradigm of adaptations have come into existence. Films like Detective Pikachu and Sonic the Hedgehog are taking games with inherently simple and primitive storylines and turning them into successful summer blockbusters. While both films have their share of critics, neither of them resort to completely restructuring the genre to appeal to fans. The difference between a film like Sonic the Hedgehog and Resident Evil is that the former is already guaranteed to have mass appeal. Sonic is significantly more marketable and universally known even by people who don't play video games. Pikachu is immediately recognizable as the mascot for Pokemon, even if a person has no understanding of the world from which he hails. Believe it or not, this is directly beneficial to both films, since the lack of an expansive universe and an overarching plot allows the writers a significant amount of freedom, since there are much fewer things they have to worry about getting wrong. In Sonic, all the fans care to see is Sonic himself being his usual quick-witted and sarcastic self, and Eggman being a diabolical evil genius. As long as these two elements are present, any typical Hollywood formula can work. Detective Pikachu is an interesting case, since it creates a big universe for its plot that is almost bigger than the source material. Most Pokemon games have extremely simple storylines, usually involving an evil group of criminals that want to gain power or money. Detective Pikachu, however, abandons this entirely and simply uses the Pokemon franchise as a backdrop for a detective story. It's not groundbreaking by any means, but it mostly works. The average moviegoer does not have to understand the world of the Pokemon games to understand that the main character wants to find his dad and make some friends along the way. Coming back to Uncharted. The film seems to be creating a new story that complements the one in the games, acting as a prequel to Drake's Fortune, but the idea is inherently flawed since the film will be forced to focus on linear storytelling and lacks any sort of interactivity and gratification from the audience. Tom Holland's star power alone might ensure that the film is a commercial success, but like usual it will likely fail to capture the charm from the games. A recent trend in the realm of video game adaptations comes from the increasing popularity of streaming services like Netflix and HBO Max. Recently, Netflix announced that they will be producing a live-action miniseries based on Resident Evil, entirely unrelated to the Anderson films, as well as an Assassin's Creed series. At the same time, HBO is producing a miniseries based on The Last of Us, and given their reputation and the already cinematic nature of that game's story, it is not unbelievable that they could be amazingly well written and well cast. The recent trend of making video game series into live-action TV shows has shown no signs of stopping, as several more projects are reportedly in the works, and given the fact that television has a much longer runtime than cinema, this may prove to be the best possible way to bring game worlds to the silver screen. Uncharted is in post-production and is set to release in theaters on July 16, 2021. The Last of Us on HBO is slated for a 2021 air date, and the release dates for Resident Evil and Assassin's Creed Netflix series are as of yet unconfirmed. Only time will tell if these projects pay off and end up being faithful adaptations, but one thing is certain: the film industry is persistent and has shown no signs of stopping anytime soon.